now we find out 6 years later that it turns out that there were memos by members of the Bush administration saying that, that their torture justifications were ridiculous and not even close to true, and that they had violated international law. The guy who authored those memos is a State Department counselor at the time, Philip Zelikow. And he said that the White House approved interrogation amounted to, quote, war crimes. So he did not mince his words. He said that waterboarding was no way legal, domestic, or internationally. There's no way you could justify it according to any law, whether it's international law or our own law. So he is crystal clear on this. Of course, they take this memo written by the counselor to the State Department. They go, yeah, no, not buying it. We're going to keep torturing anyway. Now, that happened during the Bush years. Now, during the Obama years, first good news, on a second full day in office, President Obama said, we will not be doing those interrogation techniques anymore. It's torture, and we're not going to do it. That's terrific. The bad news is that given that even though Bush administration counselors thought that it was illegal, there will, of course, nonetheless be no prosecutions whatsoever. Now, if there are no prosecutions of a thing that is theoretically illegal, in practice, it is perfectly legal. So, for example, if the Obama administration says, look, we theoretically think bank robbery is illegal, but everybody who's ever done a bank robbery before, we will not prosecute. We know they did the bank robbery, and we've got memos of their co-conspirators saying this is a bank robbery. But we don't look backwards, we only look forwards, so it's okay. Now, what's the message that that sends? It sends, well, maybe you might want to suspend your bank robbery for the moment being, but the minute this gentleman is out of office, it's obviously nothing that gets prosecuted, and so you can continue doing your bank robberies. So now torture has become a matter of opinion. Well, this administration, or policy even, this administration chooses not to do torture, but it's certainly not a matter of law because the Obama administration has decided that it's not something that can be prosecuted or something they've chosen not to prosecute. So thereby, de facto, making it legal. So I think that that is in some ways more damaging than doing the torture in the first place. Now, doing the torture is reprehensible and what we complained about, but we were told throughout that time, don't worry, it's an aberration. We were told by people on our side, people that are in the middle, by legal scholars. When the next administration comes in, well, they'll show that it was illegal and they'll take action and we will go back on the correct path. Well, the next administration came in and said, no, we won't be doing it for the moment being, but there is no correct path. No one will be prosecuted. We're not considering it a crime. In any other crime, it would be ridiculous to say, I'm not looking backwards, I'm only looking forwards. All the crimes are committed in the past. It'd be like a judge coming forward, I'll give you another example, even though you don't need one, and saying, oh, you did the murder yesterday. Well, I don't look backward, I look forward. So obviously, that's not going to get prosecuted. So tremendous damage, and we're not the only ones who think that. The ACLU, of course, also thinks that. Jamil Jaffer, who's their national security expert, had this to say: the administration has clearly disavowed torture, and that is an important and welcome thing, but they're steadily building a framework for impunity. Now, see, that's the really important part. It's impunity. You can do it with impunity. You never get prosecuted, what we were just talking about. Now, the second part of his complaint about this, and this is a really good point. He says, we didn't worry so much about that because the Bush administration was seen as an outlier and an aberration, and the Bush precedent wouldn't have been seen as weighty. It's not at all difficult to imagine future presidents citing President Obama in their defense of carrying out more targeted killing of American citizens. Now, this is important because he's saying, look, the only civil rights issue or human rights issue in this case was not torture. There were other things, warrantless wiretapping, which President Obama has continued to do and put a stamp of approval on, the execution of U.S. citizens abroad without a trial, and, the list goes on, let alone the things that they tried at least. They're trying to close Guantanamo, but it didn't work. So that's those military tribunals will go on. So most of this is continuity, and they're saying, what the ACLU is saying here is that since you didn't stop it, all of those things, well, that's going to be seen as bipartisan, and every administration going forward is going to feel empowered to execute U.S. citizens without trial abroad until, of course, they do it at home. I'm sure that'll never happen, never, except for all the things that were never supposed to happen and already happened. And by the way, also the ability to detain U.S. citizens without trial with the military inside the United States. That's also been signed under President Obama, And also something President Obama said, well, I choose not to apply that as long as I'm in office, meaning that the next person who comes in office, Democrat or Republican, can choose to arrest U.S. citizens in the country with the military without trial. So, well, Constitution, it was nice knowing you. And finally, the ACLU also says, now, we're making many of these emergency powers permanent and bipartisan. We're enshrining these things into our permanent law. And there you have it. So, obviously, I'm like-minded with the ACLU, and I think that every, right-thinking person in the country should agree with that. And anybody who cares about the Constitution, anyone who calls themselves a conservative, anyone who calls themselves a liberal, anyone who calls themselves a libertarian, anyone who calls themselves American should agree with that.